Welcome to the Wild Side. This is your host, Kight, and today we are talking about the science of pets and using pets as therapy. And that's why we've had Nico Case introduce the show today with the song I'm an Animal. Now, I'm interested in this topic because I am a huge pet lover, and actually by accident today I'm even wearing a necklace that has a cat, so that just shows you how much I love my domestic animals. Now, actually, the love of domestic animals is something that goes back tens of thousands of years, or at least the having of domestic animals. I can't say how much people enjoyed having them around, but dogs were thought to be the first animals that were domesticated, and that happened somewhere between 30,000 and 7,000 BC, and it happened multiple different places, in Europe, in East Asia, and in Africa. And sheep were next, some nice edible animals, and that happened between 11,000 and 9,000 BC in Southwest Asia. And then that followed basically one or two different animals every millennium after that. So we had pigs, goats, cows, cats, chickens, guinea pigs, donkeys, ducks, horses, pigeons, geese, ferrets, turkeys, you name it. And all of this had happened actually even before the turn of the first millennium AD. And why is it that we had all of these animals? Well, obviously with dogs, we were interested in dogs because they could help us hunt and they could help protect us. And then all of the things that are edible, of course, sheep, pigs, goats, that sort of thing, having them easily accessible rather than having to go into the forest and hunt them down and expose ourselves to danger, to have ones that are a bit more tame and so they aren't going to get as angry when we approach them. And then we started to realize these secondary uses of them. So with sheep, for instance, of course, they have wool that they can offer. Cows and lots of other animals have skins and bones that can be made into things like clothing and tools. And so little by little we have these animals in our lives serving a very useful purpose. But the truth is that, as I kind of indicated earlier, it wasn't just having these things around in a utilitarian purpose. We as humans for quite a long time have shown signs of really caring about and caring for these animals. And that goes above and beyond just having someone around to kind of help you out in some functional way. So this is only one reason why domestication would have emerged, this kind of emotional response and mental response towards animals. But it is something that is quite important to consider. So why is it that we would have developed evolutionarily to actually care for the animals in our keep? And there have been lots of proposals over the years to explain why this has happened. For example, having the ability to care for young animals is in many ways similar to having the ability to care for a young human animal. So it might be a sign if you're able to raise lots of young animals in your care and have them be in good shape and have them survive for a long time, have them reproduce quite well, it might indicate that you're a person who's going to be quite fit for breeding your own children. And so in a way then it would be kind of a sexually selected signal that would demonstrate your suitability as a mate. Another idea is that having empathy with animals might have given us an advantage when we were hunting and then herding and then domesticating. So perhaps the humans that did best at procuring meat for themselves and whatever other sources of things animals might have offered, they were better at that whenever they had kind of this feeling of simpatico with animals. They kind of knew how to think like animals, they knew where they were going to be and how they were going to act, and they could anticipate them a little bit. And so these traits also would have helped them when herding and also in making animals progress from being wild to being domestic. So perhaps this is actually a trait in us, this empathy for animals, that has evolved over time because the people who were most empathetic were those who were able to get all of these resources and do quite well. And keeping livestock healthy and safe would only have been a secondary part, because it would have allowed you then to maintain quite large herds and quite large flocks. Now either way, no matter how it is that you think this has come about, it's quite clear that having this kind of feeling towards animals that allows you to anticipate them and have kind of an understanding of how they think and how they feel would have translated into greater success. And so this would have allowed people to have done better over time. And of course, we might simply have been pre-adapted to respond to animals because of the ways in which their stimuli overlap with our own. So we've got young puppies and kittens that have many of the same features in terms of the way that they look facially and the way that they act in kind of that goofy, silly, funny kind of way. These things tug on our heartstrings because they do remind us of the way that human babies act, and we're pre-programmed to respond quite strongly to human babies to make sure that we care for them. So maybe this is something that's just carried over and made us interact with animals in the same way that we would interact with people. Now, all of this is quite open to debate, but people have been kind of researching this and proposing various theories over the years, because there is obviously this huge attraction between humans and our pets. So depending on where you are looking in the world, rates of animal ownership can often exceed 50% of households, and in many households you've got more than one pet. So pets are just a huge part of our society, and they are a huge source of income, a huge source of decision making. So they are quite an important thing when you're thinking about policies and also just kind of how society functions. Now, this actually does also have impacts in the realm of science, because animals and humans can have quite interesting impacts on each other. And one of the things I want to focus on today is how pets and other animals, other domestic animals, can have a big impact on human health. So one of the first kind of important discoveries in this realm of research came in 1929, when researchers found that dogs' blood pressure was reduced when they were stroked by humans. And the reverse relationship was later found actually quite a lot later in 1983. So here we have clear evidence that there's something about being around humans that makes dogs quite happy, and there's something about being around dogs that makes humans quite happy. And at least since the 1970s, researchers have recognized that pets could have serious medical benefits for patients. And at first the attention was focused on the mental and emotional effects. So this, if blood pressure is going down, then you've got a more relaxed animal, and relaxation is something that's quite nice for keeping you calm and allowing you to tolerate things that otherwise would be too unpleasant and make you quite nervous and excitable. And so here we are focusing on mental and emotional effects, particularly in elderly patients, because often elderly patients are alone with the exception of their companion pets, and also in people with mental disorders. And that's important because often people who do have mental disorders are a bit harder to reach, and it's harder to communicate with them. So people were interested in using animals in place of humans in order to kind of reach these patients. But little by little, pets were also linked with physical, not physical problems, but kind of helping people get through physical problems. So one of the early, actually probably the earliest study on this, was looking at animal companions and heart patients. And companionship at this point in time when the study was conducted in the 80s was known to be positively related to various health outcomes. But there was no real understanding of what it was that kind of made this happen. What was the mechanism behind this relationship? And so these researchers studied 92 patients for a period of 1 year after they had been admitted to the hospital for having a heart attack. And a large portion of these patients had one or more pets. So what they were interested in was looking at survivorship of people who did and did not have pets over that 1 year period. And they found that among 92 patients, 78 of them survived a year or more after hospital admission. And where 28% of non-pet owners died, only 6% of pet owners died. And these results seemed to not just be associated with physical activity related to having a pet, so the fact that people who had pets either they were forced to go out and walk the animal or take care of its toilet or feed it and all that sort of thing, but also the idea that if you were capable of doing those things, you were pretty healthy, and that's why you had a pet. You can't really know which way the causation went there, but either way it seemed to go beyond that, because they found that it wasn't just dog owners who saw the benefits, and dog owners are the ones who were having to do these really more strenuous activities. They also found that it was beneficial if you had small things like mice, rats, guinea pigs, cats, which in many ways are fairly self-sufficient, even things like fish. So just having an animal there in the house was quite useful. And also the result doesn't seem to be related just to companionship, because many of many of these people had human people with them in the home. And so whether or not it was a human in the home or a pet in the home or no one in the home, that didn't seem to have a big impact on whether they were surviving or not. So this really was showing that there was something about the pets themselves in general that was helping these heart patients do well after their procedure. And at the time, these researchers pinpointed a number of avenues of future research that have now been investigated by lots of researchers. So for instance, they wanted to know what happened if you have pleasurable activities such as, stroking the pet and cuddling with the pet, as opposed to more functional sorts of things. What is it about the pets? Maybe is it that they are acting kind of as a clock and forcing people into having a routine, getting up in the morning, taking the animal for a walk or feeding it or whatever at a particular time of day? Are the pets providing attention in a certain way that is making people quite happy? So the fact that it's not associated with bargaining or supplication, but it's just on offer all the time. All these sorts of things, they wanted to understand, what exactly was it about that human-animal bond that was so pleasant to these heart patients, that was helping them stay alive for longer. Now, the researchers also noticed that, even though there were these positives associated with pets, there also were some potential negatives. So people who have pets have to arrange pet care, for instance, if they're going into the hospital or if they're going on a trip. When they're in the hospital or elsewhere, they do worry about a pet, the pet that they're absent from, and this can cause a lot of stress and anxiety, which can be medically difficult for them. Pets are also responsible for allergies and disease transmission, and there's been extensive research around natural disasters, and especially Hurricane Katrina, revealing that people show an unwillingness to leave dangerous areas without their pets. And in fact, because of what happened in Hurricane Katrina, there have been many subsequent modifications to evacuation plans to make sure that people can leave with all of their pets and be guaranteed that whenever they get where they're going, their pets will be accepted, or they will have some sort of something set up that they can hand over their pets to someone and have the pets transported for them. And of course, another potential negative of pets is potential animal attacks. And also, of course, when you lose a pet, you're going to be quite sad. And so all of these things cumulatively can weigh against the idea that pets can be quite a helpful thing in terms of healthcare and kind of emotional and mental and physical benefits. But at the same time, there is quite a lot of strong research, going back several decades now, that indicates that animals can be quite helpful. And I'm going to explore that in a little bit more detail after the break, but first I'm going to be playing Bob Marley singing Three Little Birds. That was Bob Marley singing Three Little Birds. And today we are talking about humans and pets, and the fact that sometimes pets are more than just someone or something that makes us quite happy. They can in fact have a serious and noticeable medical impact on us. And before the break I was talking about how there are both benefits and drawbacks to having pets in terms of they seem to have this important mental and emotional and physical impact on us, and yet they can have some negative effects such as causing allergies and transmitting disease. But for the most part, researchers do think that there is this quite positive benefit of having animals in our homes, and they're trying to figure out what it is that causes this to happen. And so, in order to really understand that, not just looking at the presence of pets and correlates such as a certain level of happiness or a certain extent to which people recover after a procedure, that sort of thing, scientists started to really track down a chemical basis of a human-animal bond. And this was important because this would really begin to show mechanistically what it is that could cause us to have empathy for animals, in the same way that we have empathy for each other, for example. So there are several recent studies that have begun to explain the mechanisms responsible for this human-animal bond. And these have begun to really converge on a particular type of chemical and suite of chemicals, really, that are responsible for these relationships and the strength of these relationships. Now, in one study, researchers asked a bunch of human volunteers to come in, and they were given the chance to either read a book for a certain period of time and just sit there by themselves in an empty room and read, or to interact with dogs for that same period of time. And the researchers then measure the blood pressure, I have a hard time with this term, the blood pressure of both species during these interactions. And the blood pressure in this case would be an indication of how stressed out either species would feel during these encounters. And they found that within 5 minutes of some interactions, but also sometimes taking a bit longer, the pressure would begin to decrease in both humans and in dogs. And this would indicate then that both of these species were finding these encounters to be quite pleasurable. And in fact, the encounters were counteracting things like anxiety or stress. And in both of the species, the researchers also found increases in something called beta endorphin, as well as oxytocin, dopamine, prolactin, and a bunch of other chemicals. Now, humans also had significant decreases in cortisol levels, and cortisol is typically associated with stress. So as I said, all of these things are showing that the presence of animals is making humans feel more relaxed. And although book reading was also beneficial, so many of these same patterns were seen, they weren't quite as strong, and so there were significant differences in the endorphins, in the oxytocin levels, and in prolactin. And all of these were increased more during the dog interactions. So what are these chemicals, and why are they interesting in this context? Well, beta endorphin is something that's associated with lots of different things, including analgesia, euphoric states, de-stressful situations such as affiliative grooming and monkeys. And so basically, the presence of this is something that indicates to researchers looking in from the outside that people are becoming much happier and kind of in a more zen state of mind. Prolactin is something that you're probably more familiar with because it promotes the bonding associated with parenting behavior. So many parents, as soon as the baby is delivered and they hold it and look at it for the first time, describe this feeling of intense love and joy. And the reason that they're feeling that, mechanistically speaking, is that they have this surge of prolactin which causes them to have this intense bond with their young, which of course is evolutionarily useful because it makes sure that you as a parent are going to take care of your offspring and make sure that it is raised as healthfully and safely as possible. Dopamine is something else you might have heard of, and it's associated with the experience of pleasure and exhilaration. Oxytocin is a hormone that promotes intimate bonding, and it's most commonly again associated with the parent-offspring bond, but it's also important in general social attachments and in stress relief situations. And so all of these things cumulatively are showing that there are a lot of chemical reasons why humans should enjoy being in the presence of dogs. Now, why is it that these things are released is a bit of a different question, but mechanistically this is what causes us to be happy once the animals are there. Now, another interesting thing about oxytocin is that it can also prepare the body for healing and growing new cells. And so having a lot of oxytocin in your system can place you in the position to experience emotional and mental benefits physically from the presence of pets. And so this in particular might be the thing that's linking the presence of pets in the home with improvements in health and staying away from death soon after a surgery or any kind of other procedure. And actually, oxytocin can be released for lots of different reasons, not just sitting around interacting with the dog, but also researchers have found that even simply making eye contact with the dog can cause oxytocin to increase, and this was studied in dog owners, so it may not just be any dog, but if you're looking at your own animal, you will have an increase in oxytocin. Also, if you have been at work and you come home and greet your dog and it greets you and is quite excited to see you, this also elicits an increase in oxytocin. And interestingly, this result was found for women, but not for men, which may be just a peculiarity of that one particular study, but may also indicate that women and men feel differently towards their pets. Also, people have researched what happens if you've got humans interacting with rats. And so when rats were stroked for 40 times a minute over a period of 5 minutes, they found that it reduced the rats' stress responses, it increased their pain tolerance, it calmed them even to the point of sleep, and all of these effects were the same as those that were observed when the rats instead were injected with oxytocin. So this indicates that it's not just humans who are benefiting from the relationships, but also the pets as well. And when you've got pets like snakes and fish and things like that, they might not be feeling in quite the same way that you do. They may not have these feelings of love that a dog or a cat or a parrot or any other really social animal will have. But all the same, the human, the owner, will still benefit from that interaction. So regardless of whether it's both of you or one of you, someone will likely benefit from these pleasant associations between humans and pets. And this is one of the things that has led researchers to investigate the idea of pet therapy. And this is basically the use of pets in medical settings in order to improve any aspect of a patient's life. So whether that's happiness, whether it's helping them get kind of more online mentally, whether it's the physical recuperation from a procedure, or all of these things. And actually the use of this predates our understanding of the physical effects of human-animal relationships. For example, Florence Nightingale felt that pets were useful when caring for mentally ill patients who were institutionalized, and she advocated taking pets into institutional settings so that people who were in there and kind of kept away from other humans and weren't quite having the same sorts of contact that people out in the real world would have, she felt that they would benefit from having pets substituted in the place of humans. And there are many ways in which to use pets in medical and therapeutic settings, and these actually I'm going to go through kind of a list now and discuss them in a bit more detail. And it's important to note that a lot of these things, they were kind of just tried, just out of curiosity to see if they would work. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that these things do have some sort of a positive impact. But there's actually not a whole lot of really firm scientific research quite yet. And people are now really interested in getting these details to really understand, is this something that's statistically significant? Is it something we can really document? Or is this just something that, because a few people are reporting the positives, that's why we think that this is happening? So kind of keep that in mind as I rattle all of these things off. They're not necessarily things that are tried and true just yet. So first of all, one of the really important things that people have started to advocate is using pets with children. And psychologists will often use pets when they're trying to place children at ease during interviews, because it has been found that blood pressure, heart rate, behavioral distress are all lower when a pet is present, in particular dogs, during examinations. And so if you have one of these animals in the room, then children will relax a bit more, and they might reveal more information, which is obviously quite useful for someone trying to make a diagnosis and find out what's going wrong. And the same thing is true just in kind of a physical examination setting. So if you take a pet into the room when you go to the doctor and have to get a shot or some other unpleasant procedure, children will actually respond quite a bit better when there's a dog there to calm them down. And there's also evidence that cognitive processing is improved in children who are in the presence of animals. And these are actually some pretty unusual studies that have been done, and I'm not really sure what these mean in a real-world context. But basically, this one group of researchers took animals into a classroom, and they asked children to classify objects into categories. So they had animate objects and inanimate objects, and the children were asked to associate these things with either a farm setting or an ocean setting. So for example, they might be shown a tractor or a whale or a cow, and asked to associate those with either farm or ocean. And the kids that didn't have a dog with them would either be exposed to a stuffed dog toy or to a human. So they did want to make sure that all children had some companion, but only one of those companions was an actual pet. And they found that the children did perform better on the task when the dog was there, as opposed to when there was a stuffed dog toy or a person. And they found a similar finding whenever the children were asked to do memory tasks in the presence of animals or not. Now, all of these kids were preschoolers, and age may or may not have made a difference, and task may or may not have made a difference. I'm not sure, again, like I said, what the real-world application of this is, but there does seem to be some impact of pets on cognition. And researchers have also found that in the classroom, if you have a dog around the students, it tends to make them more homogeneous in terms of their behavior. So the kids who are really hyperactive are a bit more kind of in the mid-range of energy. The kids who are a bit more shy became more involved and more outgoing. And in general, having all of these people kind of moving towards the center of the spectrum improved integration and cohesion of the classroom, which then enabled the teachers to teach a bit more easily because everyone was kind of in the same mindset, and it allowed them to get through the lesson much more easily.